Doubt is the absence of hubris. Certainty is the proof of it. Well, I don't know who made up that quote. I think what it means is that doubt is a natural condition. And doubt is what we ask of you as jurors when you evaluate the evidence in a case, is to look at it critically, use your common sense. Doubt, ask questions, because this is a case of circumstantial evidence. What that means is that even though the law makes no distinction, the evidence has to be so compelling as to remove all reasonable doubt. In other words, that there is no other possible interpretation of this evidence other than that the defendant is guilty. If there is any other possible interpretation, then the defendant is not guilty. And that is the consequence of a case based solely on circumstantial evidence. We heard Investigator Bosenberg, who stated under oath that he could not rule out an intruder. He was the one who investigated the crime scene. And although this is a horrific crime scene with 3 people tragically killed, it does not lower the burden of proof that the state must meet. So please do not let it inflame your passions or make you concerned that you should lower the burden of proof for the state simply because 3 people were tragically killed in this case. Because there are 4 victims in this case, and one of them is Alexander Jackson. So, as you saw in some of the crime scene videos, the body cams of these officers, as they moved through this house, this is a family that took pride in their family. They were a great family. They took great pride in all the vacations they took, all of the things that they did together, trips that they went on, accomplishments that the kids did, and the Eagle Scouts. Here's a picture of the family. There's Alex as an Eagle Scout. These pictures and pictures like this were all over the walls of this home. And as you listen to Ms. Slaughter this morning, the one thing that she didn't say is why. Why would Alexander Jackson kill his family? It makes no sense. This was a normal family. This was a happy family. There's simply no motive for Alex to do this. And no motive has ever been proven. And when you look at what the state has to prove in this case, the judge has read the instructions and you've been handed them. Motive does not have to be proven by the state. They don't have to prove that. But when you try to make sense of the evidence in this case, you also have to do that in the context of this family dynamic. Of why? Why would Alex do this? When he repeatedly told the investigators that he loved his family, that he wouldn't do this. Neighbors didn't notice any issues. Friends never noticed any issues. Teachers never noticed anything wrong. Scoutmasters never noticed anything wrong. They saw a family that participated in the family events, that interacted happily and normally together on the trips that they went on the scouting trips, and all the things of that nature. We heard testimony about Alex's character, that he went to Kennedy High School, that he graduated there, that he was accepted into the University of Iowa. He was an Eagle Scout. An Eagle Scout. Not just a Boy Scout, not a Cub Scout. He went on and went through all of the requirements for an Eagle Scout. He played flute in the top band. He was polite. He was respectful. He had no history of violence, no history of mental illness, and had never been in trouble before. When the prosecution talked to you just a little while ago about his fingerprints, they only had his fingerprints because they arrested him. They did not exist prior to that in their files. When you look at this neighborhood and you think, as we heard from police officers, not a lot goes wrong in this neighborhood. When you look at this neighborhood, if someone was going to do a home invasion, this would be the perfect neighborhood for it. It's affluent. Those are affluent homes. They're large. They're spaced out. The homes are spaced out away from each other. They're surrounded by wooded areas, and they're secluded, relatively secluded for an urban area. And as we saw, particularly in the Jackson home, the dog did not bark when the police arrived. I think on one of those cameras, you heard the dog go, woof, just one time. If you listen carefully, you can hear it. But I don't know about you, my dog goes crazy when anybody comes anywhere near the house. There were no cars in the driveway, and there were multiple guns in this home. Now, we don't know what the intruder's intent was or why they were there. May not ever know. But it could have been because there were firearms in this home. There was a case years and years ago, which was the subject of a famous novel, In Cold Blood, where a home was invaded in Holcomb, Kansas, because of a rumor that the guy kept $10,000 in his safe. This was back in 1950, so that was a lot of money. And because of what happened in that instance, when these two guys went in and killed everybody in that house, it became a very salacious story that Truman Capote wrote a novel about. These things happen. Home invasions happen. They happen, unfortunately, all over the country. And they happen for motives that we don't always understand. There isn't a shred of evidence in this case that disputes anything that Alexander Jackson said happened. Alex said he was sleeping on the porch with his dog. There's bedding that was found in the porch. He was sleeping there, and he heard shots. That was his testimony. Now, was he sleeping? Was he on his phone? He was definitely on his phone at 6:53 in the morning, searching for who played the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. Did he fall back asleep? Was he messing around on his phone? Did he drift off? Kids do that. But he was awakened to the sound of gunshots. And he had his phone with him on the porch. He hears the shots. Now, a lot of us would like to think in an emergency situation that we would act immediately, that we wouldn't freeze up, that we wouldn't be scared. But maybe Alex was. Maybe Alex froze. He hears the shots. He hears more shots. And he's afraid. And he hears somebody moving about through the house. He hears a number of shots. He estimates 10, I think, at one point. But you know he's not counting them exactly. And he can hear someone moving through the house. And then it stops. So Alex either goes down the porch steps outside the house and comes back in through the back, or he comes around and goes down the steps inside the house. And what does he see? He sees a man standing over his father. And Alex runs at him, and a struggle ensues. Here's the important fact about the shell casings in this case, ladies and gentlemen. The first 4 were found, now we're assuming these are the first 4, right there, right behind that area there is the back door. The back door would be right here. This is the back of that sofa. 4 shots fired in that area. That's where the gun drops those casings. 5 in the master bedroom. You got that one? It's okay. You remember from the testimony there was five shell casings found in the master bedroom. And there were 2 shell casings found in the sister's bedroom. What's that add up to? There's 4 of the 5 in the master bedroom in State's Exhibit 104. There's the 5th one in State's Exhibit 108. And then there was 2 shell casings. There's number 37 found in the sister's bedroom, Sabrina's bedroom, and number 19. That adds up to 11. Now the shooter is out of bullets. And I would submit to you that the order must have been when that person came in to the house. He sees the gun there. Does he have knowledge of firearms or not? We don't know. But he sees the gun there. We don't know how long it took him to load it, if he had to load it. If it wasn't already loaded, we don't know that. But maybe he has some knowledge of firearms, or maybe he took the time to figure it out. because we don't know how long he was in there before he was discovered. Jan Jackson is moving around. As the state said, Jan Jackson is awake. He sees the person or hears the person and comes running down the stairs. That's when the intruder fires off 4 shots at Jan Jackson, missing him one time into the wall. That's why those 4 casings are there. Then the intruder goes upstairs from the direction that Jan Jackson came and shoots the mom, shoots Melissa 5 times, shooting these people multiple times. That's 9 shots. He comes back downstairs to look for anybody else. And he goes past Alex's room. Alex isn't there because he's on the porch. But now Alex is starting to move. Alex is starting to come around to see what's happening. And he shoots Sabrina. He's going to shoot her 4 or 5 times, this intruder. But he runs out of bullets. He's only got 2 left. That's why she was only shot twice. That's when he goes around, he's reloading the gun. And why is he reloading the gun? Because Jan Jackson isn't dead yet. Jan Jackson is still making sounds. Jan Jackson is still breathing. So the intruder reloads. As he's doing that, he goes over and he shoots Jan Jackson twice. As he's standing over Jan Jackson with those additional shell casings that we find next to Jan Jackson's body, Alex surprises him. Alex comes up behind him, either from outside, going down the porch steps into the basement, or coming around from the stairs. I believe he must have come around from the basement that way because the shooter would have his back to him as he's shooting the father. As he's killing the father, making sure the father is dead, that's when Alex surprises him. And that's when Alex gets shot in the foot with that struggle. Because the man has now reloaded. 2 shell casings are found on either side of Jan Jackson's body, and 1 shell casing is found next to the gun that's lying on the ground. But we could get to that next. I want you to look at this, where this foot, the hole is in Alex's foot here. See where it is? See where it is on his foot, because this is going to be important in a second. Can we go to the next shot then of the hallway? This is the hallway. This photo is State's Exhibit 72. You see this blood right here? This is where Alex got shot in the foot. Not in his bedroom. The evidence will show that this is where he got shot, because this is where the gun is, this is where the shell casing is, but more importantly, the footprint. If we could zoom in on this right here in the middle of the screen. Pull that up a little bit, please. Right here. Look at that print. I don't know if you can see it. That print has a foot with a hole in it and blood coming out. Right there. Right there. Pointing in that direction. As if somebody got shot in the foot there with this blood here, and you can follow these footprints all the way down that hallway. There's 2 kinds of prints, ladies and gentlemen. When you look at the hallway photos, there's 2 kinds of prints. One before a shirt is put on his foot, and one after a shirt is put on his foot. And you can tell because there's a gap. If we follow down this hallway here, these are the 2 trails I'm talking about. This is the one where he already has the shirt on his foot. This is the one that is this one. There, 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 there. He is making his way to the bedroom to get a tourniquet for his foot. So he goes in to his bedroom. We have here, this is good. This is a close-up shot of that. There's the print with a bloody extra blood deposit where the hole was in Alex's foot. He's going this way. He's heading towards his room. And this is after he comes back out. This is his print with the towel on, with the shirt on. Can we go into the bedroom then? This is the buckle, the belt that he used to try to make a tourniquet with, that he told the police, and it broke. Next picture, please. This is his bed. This is where, obviously, the belt broke. There's a pool of blood here, which would have collected while Alex tried to put a tourniquet on his foot. And this is obviously that blood bleeding out from that hole in his foot, right there where it came to rest on the side of the bed as he sat on the bed. Now, did he hop into his bedroom, and that's why there's not a print going in that direction? We don't know. But what we do know, can we get the next shot? Here, as you can see, after he's tried the tourniquet, after he's put a shirt on his foot, that happens. That print happens. Can you blow that up a little bit, please? See the gap here? The gap in the bloody print. That's where the shirt was wrapped around Alex's foot. Can we go back to the hallway now, please? And now you see the effect of that shirt, and you see the gap on his footprint right there. Coming back this way to check on his father. How do we know that it happened this way? Well, we don't, but it's a fair interpretation of the evidence. But let's consider what the state thinks happened. Can we pull back to that original shot? Is there another one that has a gun in it? There, right there. Are we to believe that Alex took that gun all the way into his bedroom, shot himself in the foot, then covered up his bloody foot with a tourniquet, and then picked up that gun again and drug it all the way back there and left it right there? That gun would be covered with blood. And it's not. There's no blood on this gun. This is where he bled. The gun falls here. There's a shell casing right there. There are 2 shell casings on the either side of Mr. Jackson. And that's because that's where the killer was shooting Mr. Jackson when Alex surprised him. Otherwise, can we go back to that one again? The further one. How else does this blood get here? If it wasn't from the conflict with the intruder and he gets shot, how else would this blood get here? Was Alex supposed to come all the way back up here with the gun and then stand there and bleed? Take the tourniquet off and bleed there? That makes no sense. That's the first print he makes after his foot gets shot, before there was a bloody shirt put on it. No shell casings were found in his bedroom. There was a shell casing behind the couch, number 13, which we've talked about. Now, there was a lot of testimony about no signs of a struggle. Well, there was no sign of a struggle either when Jan Jackson fell down the stairs and landed where he did. He just didn't fall into anything. We don't know if that couch was moved or not because they never picked it up and looked to see. Maybe it did. Maybe it got lifted up and it came back down. But there's nothing else to knock over right there. There's a struggle right there. And sometimes there aren't signs of a struggle. But there is a visible path from the living room to his bedroom. And the state's theory that he shot the sister first, which I think might have been raised earlier in the case, makes no sense. Because if you were to shoot Sabrina first, twice, you wouldn't run all the way from here, all the way past where Mr. Jackson would be coming down the stairs, all the way around this sofa to take up that position where those 4 shell casings were found. That doesn't make any sense. That's why what makes sense is those 4 shell casings by that back door is where the killer came in. That's where he came in. That's where he found the gun. That's where he loaded the gun, difficult as it may be. And then Mr. Jackson comes down the stairs and he shoots him. And again, the number of times that Sabrina was shot would indicate, I would argue, that the killer was out of ammunition at that time. And yes, we obviously would agree that that weapon had to be reloaded. On the 911 call, do we have that first? Can we play the first? I'll be impressed if this works. That's okay. We got it?
Lynn County Sheriff, where is your emergency? Someone broke into our house. Our address is 4414 Oak Leaf Court, Northeast. I've been shot. My other family member's been shot. I need help immediately.
Okay, I'm getting Cedar Rapids on the line here.
I've been shot in the foot.
Okay, sir, stay on the line. Stick with me. They should be answering. Give them the address right away.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
4414 Oak Leaf Court, Northeast.
Okay, what's going on?
Someone broke in.
Okay.
I've been shot.
You've been shot?
My dad's been shot.
Okay, thank you. That wasn't great sound quality, but what he says on that first call is, I've been shot. My other family member's been shot. Now, the big difference between a possessive S and a plural S would be if you were talking about all of your family members, you would say, my other family members have been shot, not my other family members been shot. That's the possessive use of the S. In other words, my family member, his father's been shot. And that's clear from the rest of this call. When he talks about he's been shot, his father's been shot, my other family member's been shot isn't a reference to everybody, it's a reference to his father. You can tell by the context of the way that's used and by everything Alex says after that. He talks about his father being shot. He doesn't know how his sister is. On the ambulance ride to the hospital, Alex was worried about his family. He says, is my sister okay? And that's about the 8:56 mark. At the 8:59 mark, Alex says, did they get an ambulance for my dad? And at the 9 o'clock mark, did they get an ambulance for my dad? Again, he asks. And you can see that he is crying in the ambulance on the way there. Obviously, Alex is in pain. He's in shock. He's given fentanyl on the ambulance. The male paramedic says, okay, what number would you give that pain? 10 being the worst pain you've ever felt in your life. And Alex says, probably a 10. And again, Alex was given fentanyl, and we heard about what fentanyl can do. So then, Alex is taken to the hospital, and the 4-hour hospital interrogation begins at that time. This is a picture of Alex when he gets there at the hospital. You can see in his eyes the shock and the terror. You can see his condition with his foot. We heard testimony about the effects of trauma on memory, and we heard those from Investigator Denlinger, because he knows the effects that trauma can have on people's ability to relate a story rationally and concisely and appropriately, that trauma can cause confusion. Trauma can cause memory lapses, and we know that because the Cedar Rapids Police has that very policy for their officers. Officers involved in traumatic incidents must be given up to 72 hours before they have to make a statement to anybody. And that's because of the known effects of trauma on people's ability to relate things that just happened. Add to that the effects of fentanyl, which Dr. Cruz said can cause euphoria and can cause confusion. You add those two things together and you have somebody who is most likely disoriented and is not there, as Timothy Brown stated at 9:08 when he hands off Alex to investigators Denlinger and Lucina. He says, he's not there right now. And Sarah Lucina says, yeah, I can tell. And then at 9:29, the female hospital staff worker says, can I give him pain meds? And Sarah Lucina says, is your foot real bad? Do you think you can hold off on pain meds for maybe 15 minutes for us to talk to you? Can you imagine if you were Alex's parent in that situation? Would you stand for that? Would anybody stand for that? Denying somebody pain medication while they ask them questions. And these aren't questions designed to find out who the intruder was. These investigators were on Alex in minutes because they didn't believe there was an intruder. This is before they'd even been to the crime scene. This is before they ever knew anything about any cameras or dog tracking or anything. They were on Alex. Yeah, sure, they acted nice, but the most important thing is Alex was nice. Alex was polite. Everything that people said about Alex, he demonstrated in that interview, in that interrogation. He was polite to the officers. Even when they insulted him, he was polite to them. When they show up, this is the part about the fentanyl being administered. When they show up at 9:16 and start talking to Alex, Sarah Lucina says, "My name is Sarah, and I'm an investigator with the police department, and this is my partner, Matt. He's an investigator, too, at the police department." And Alex says, "Oh, good." He doesn't know what he's in for. He doesn't know the kind of grilling that he's in for. And then he gets another dose of fentanyl. And Alex says, "What is that?" And the female hospital staff says, "Fentanyl, the same medicine they gave you in the ambulance." 3 minutes later, under the influence of this drug, Alex says, "My mom is here," or you can hear that at 9:47 on the interview. I asked Investigator Denlinger, and he agreed that that's what Alex said. At 10:14, when it becomes obvious to Alex that they are directly accusing him of this crime, he says, "I didn't do it, okay? I would never hurt my family. They're important to me. I love them. You may not understand that, but I love them." Then comes the false accusations about the cameras. Denlinger says, "So at what point did you unplug the camera?" Alex says, "Unplug what camera?" Matthew Denlinger says, "Your camera." Alex says, "I don't know how they work. They're also hooked up to the garage. I don't know. They're also wireless." Meaning, how can you unplug them? They're wireless. And then, in response to an allegation that the alarm system had been disabled, Alex goes, "Oh, there's no alarm system. There hasn't been for years." And Denlinger says, "There hasn't been for years." At 10:09, Sarah Lucina says, "And that's what I mean. That's why I want to know, is because you're adamant that you would never, but the evidence is pointing towards that you did." And Alex says, "Well, can't you do some lab stuff?" He wants them to do more investigation. He's not acting like somebody who just slaughtered his family. And here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. He's in shock. He's under the influence of anesthetic drugs. And so it would be easy for people to sit back and say, "I'd have been more upset than that. I'd have been crying more than that. I'd have been shouting out for my sister back at the house, 'Sabrina, Sabrina, he's been shot in the foot.'" He is in shock. He doesn't know what to do. But for us to sit back and Monday morning quarterback what he said and how he said it, when he's in this condition, when he's sitting in a hospital bed bleeding out of his foot for 4 hours while they do nothing to help him, while he's been given pain medication, to judge his responses and the way he said them and the accuracy of those things is tantamountly unfair. We wouldn't require that of any of us under those same circumstances. And they chose to do that then. They could have waited. They could have given him time to recover. They finally did after they made all their allegations and after Alex got treated at the hospital. But that was several hours later. And that's, again, where Alex mentions again about the lab stuff. And Investigator Denlinger says, "I mean, the best evidence in a case like this is not going to be the lab stuff." And Alex says, "Well, I think that helps." Apologize for the typos there. At 10:12, Alex says, "Well, I was, because I went to my room to grab a belt. But it broke, so I wrapped it in the closest thing and stuff. Not to go get his phone, to go get a belt for a tourniquet." Now, maybe he said at a different part of his interview, "I went to get my phone." But again, you have to put this in the context of someone who's just been shot, someone who's been medicated, someone who's been traumatized. Are they going to get everything right? I don't think so. But at least at one point he said that he went to his room to get a tourniquet, and that is supported. That is supported by all that blood evidence in that hallway. And they said, "Okay, and then did you go into your mom and dad's room?" "No, I haven't been there for a while." Not once did Alex say he ever saw his sister or his mom get shot. At 12:19, Alex says, "My parents were good to me. I'll say that now and forever." And that was at the end, more towards the end of this interrogation. But they kept trying to give Alex a reason. They were grasping at straws, trying to come up with a reason. Oh, you didn't like your sister. Oh, you weren't close enough with your sister. You didn't like your dad. You didn't like your mom. Oh, the Menendez brothers, they killed their dad and their mom, and then they later claimed it was because their dad was abusive. And Alex goes, "I will never say anything bad about my parents." Alex described cleaning the gun that night. "Well, I've got the ramrod thing. I know we put that back in at least I put it back in the exercise room." And Investigator Denlinger says a few minutes later, "No, I'm talking about earlier in our conversation. You talked about you were not sure where you left the gun, but it wasn't on the fireplace." And Alex said, "I think it was because my dad was still looking at it," or something. And Investigator Denlinger says, "You said the gun was not left out on the fireplace where you cleaned it." Alex says, "It was left." And Denlinger says, "Okay, it was left on the fireplace," and Alex says, "Yeah." At 8:53 p.m., after Alex was discharged from the hospital, he was taken to the Cedar Rapids Police Department. And that's where he made the comment about his parents, and that they don't usually lock their doors. And then Denlinger says, "Well, what's your sister's password for your phone?" Is it Daddy's favorite, #1? Which was one of the last in a long line of disparaging remarks that Mr. Denlinger made about Alex during the course of that conversation. He said, "Who's going to support your Chick-fil-A habit? What are you going to do, get a job playing Halo, being the #1 guy on Halo?" And through all of it, Alex was polite. Through all of it, Alex didn't reciprocate. Through all of it, Alex denied killing his family and wanted them to do more investigation. Can't you look around some more, he said at one point. Can't you do some more investigation? We heard some testimony about the dog, Corsa. Corsa's a good dog. She's been trained in tracking. She's been trained in explosive detection. And we had a dispute about whether dogs could smell disturbed vegetation or crushed grass. And Mr. Scheer tried to ask Mr. Hyan about a couple of studies. Didn't show them to him, and asked him about them. And Mr. Hyan had never heard of any studies that said that a dog can smell human odor and crushed vegetation. It doesn't really matter for this case. It's just an example of how Officer Buckles doesn't know everything that he's talking about when it comes to dogs. Mr. Hyan does. He's been doing it his whole life. He trains the police officers. He used to, before he changed his jobs to doing what he does now as consulting. He's been all over the world, Mr. Hyan. And he evaluated Officer Buckles' job of tracking and found a number of problems with how Corsa performed and how he handled that dog. Why does this matter? Why does this matter? Because if you're going to claim that you didn't find a track, in other words, the absence of a thing, then you should do the tracking correctly. And it was Mr. Hyan's position that Officer Buckles did not do the tracking correctly. One of the reasons was the dog was panting so badly. And Officer Buckles' own training logs showed that Corsa had a history of panting, and that would interfere with her ability to smell. Corsa had no tracking experience over gravel. And if a dog can smell human odor, then you could track her over concrete. Did Officer Buckles once try to track that dog over concrete? No, because he knows. And this track is 40 minutes old at best. Now, Corsa did locate some tracks where officers had been before, but they had just recently been there. I mean just recently, just within a couple of minutes. So that plus the fact that they had been through the backyard, as Mr. Scheer pointed out, had contaminated the scene for a dog to smell an independent track. Dogs can't distinguish between one track and another, except in terms of the age of the track. And if the dog isn't on the track, it's not going to smell the track. It's not going to be standing 20 feet away and go, oh, the track is over here. You have to bring the dog within range of its snout to do that. And yeah, obviously, dogs can smell human odor. If you're right there, or if you've just left a room, they could do that. What Mr. Hyan is saying is they don't leave it on the track that you can smell 40 minutes later. I want to talk about the Ring camera. What we're looking at here in this lower picture here is the Ring camera recording the police activity on January 15th. Why does this matter? Because all the cameras showed police activity on that day except for the back camera. The back camera didn't show any of that. Why was that? That's what the police wanted to find out. Is the back camera not working properly? When the original warrant went out for the Ring camera system, it was supposedly supposed to be over a 3-day period, as the testimony said. But over a 3-day period, you get one view of the backyard over 3 days. Nobody in the summertime went out and was in the backyard of that house. There was already something wrong with this camera before we see the one with Alex in it. Maybe the camera was too high. It was up on the railing on the second floor. Maybe that outstripped its motion detecting. And so it had a sporadic motion activation system. And when we had Mr. Holst on the stand here, he said that all the cameras were offline when he subpoenaed the records for the 17th when they did that test. That's why they didn't return any data on any of the cameras, because they had gone offline by then. But that wasn't the case on the 15th. They were working. Some of those cameras were working. Do we have the video? Stop there. So, what are we seeing here? This is the day before. This was I think the testimony was late afternoon. There's Alex. This is the whole backyard right here. The camera is right up here, right? That's the camera angle. Right in the lower right-hand corner, the camera would be just off of that picture. Alex doesn't even show up on that camera till right there. All of the activity that went on coming through the back door is way over here. Now, why does that matter? If we assume that Alex goes back to where he came from, we don't know because the camera didn't pick him up till he was way over here, where no intruder might have ever been. But if we assume that Alex came from over here, can you play the rest of this clip and then the next one, please? There he goes. And then on the next one, you see him the whole time coming back. You see him the whole time. And he's going right back up there where he came from. The motion detector didn't catch that on the first shot. So there's something wrong with the motion detector on that camera. Now, they want to make the allegation that Alex messed with this camera. There's no proof of that. His prints weren't on the camera. There was nothing wrong with that camera. It had a battery in it, and the battery had charge in it. There's no proof that Alex ever had the Ring app on his phone. And they try to suggest that in the testimony, that Alex could have messed with the camera with his phone. On the stand with Investigator Denlinger, they tried to suggest that to you. Well, what have they done with that Celebrite data since they had it on June 15th of 2021? Nothing. Nothing until they brought it up on the stand, and then we had our guy look at it. Then they decided they might want to look at it. But they'll make the allegation. They'll make the allegation that he messed with that phone without any evidence whatsoever to support that. And so then what happened? Investigator Holst went and looked at it and said the exact same thing our guy said. Same thing Mr. Lyon said. Here's the two incidents where the Ring app was last used by the parents. Nothing on the kids' phones, which would be consistent with the fact that the kids had nothing to do with the camera system. That's the parents that do that. And this latent print, number 3, which is shown here in Defendant's Exhibit G. That looks a lot bigger than a centimeter to me, but I'm no expert. Looks like we got at least 2 centimeters on there, and it goes way down here. Here's the thing about that latent print that we went around and around with Investigator Bosenberg about. It is one thing to say you can't match a print. It's another to exclude someone. You don't need the same amount of information. You need several points of comparison to say this is a match. But all you need is an inconsistency to exclude someone. Don't tell me that you didn't take that print and compare it to Alexander Jackson's to see if you could exclude him. That would matter. That would be important. And I believe that was done. It would make sense. It would be logical. And then he only submits this print for identification into the state database. What if this print is the print of the intruder? What if this print comes back to somebody who had no business being in that house? What if that happens 20 years after Alex has done 20 years in prison? Are we going to apologize to him then? This print is very important and should have been pursued. Should have been pursued by people who want to know the truth. So the DNA evidence, you are going to hear me talk about DNA, and that's because you can get DNA from a lot of sources: sweat, blood, saliva, and touch. And why is that important? Remember, there was some discussion about that Idaho case. They found that DNA in one little place, and it broke the case wide open. If it hadn't been for that, investigators like Denlinger and Lucina would have been all over that roommate who survived, as if they were the one who had done it. Because there's no proof that anybody else was ever there. You have to look before you can say there's no proof. There is proof. There's proof in the physical evidence at the scene. There is proof on that gun. And maybe some of this DNA would have turned it up. But they don't want to know that. They don't want, that would be bad news for their prosecution. There were many areas on the gun that wasn't tested. And there was, they didn't even test the swabs they did of Alex. Not his hands, not his legs, all that swabbing that you see going on early, they never test any of that. But most importantly, with the gun, with how many rounds it holds, that matters. That Nibin report that said that they were 22 shorts, if those bullets were 22 shorts, then you wouldn't have to reload. But we found out they weren't. They were 22 longs. Did the experiment. So what does that mean? That means that those 3 shells that were still in there that hadn't been fired had been touched by the killer. And those were never swabbed. They were preserved. They were dropped out of that gun. They were preserved, but they were never swabbed and never sent to the DCI. That is just like that Idaho case. That is the same kind of evidence. That sheath, that knife sheath that they found in that case was the killer's. So that little print on there, or however they lifted that off, that snap on that sheath, belonged to somebody who didn't belong there, and that's how they broke that case wide open. They could have done the same thing with the bullets in this case. Alex's clothes were tested. Only Alex's blood was found on his clothes. No blood from any of his other family members were found anywhere on any of his clothes. We heard some testimony about a neighborhood canvas. And the court already read you the instruction on that. Officer Barber interviewed the workers, I think. Investigator Dunbar interviewed some neighbors. That's not evidence. What they said, those people said, is not evidence and is not to be considered. They didn't call these people as witnesses. They didn't call the workers. They didn't call the other neighbors. And so that evidence is not to be considered by you, what the officer said. It was only offered to show why the officers went to certain places. But the substance of what those people said, the testimony, what the officers claimed those people said, is not evidence. Remember when Investigator Dunbar was on the stand and he was talking about whether or not the people from Usher's Ferry ever got back to him? He was about to say they did, and then he corrected himself. And that's the reason why this kind of stuff is unreliable. But the court is specifically instructing you, if those people had testified, we'd have been able to ask them questions like, were you looking in this direction? Were you looking in that? What were you doing when all of this happened? And then the statements made by the police in their interrogations and their tactics, what they say to people, what you hear Investigator Denlinger and Investigator Lucina say, that is also not evidence. It's only to be considered in terms of Alex's response to those questions. We heard the state fish around in this case for some sort of a motive. Was it inheritance? They have no proof that Alex would inherit. They've not testified about a will, whether there is a will, whether there isn't a will, what it says, or whether Alex even knows. There was some question about the sister being bisexual, that somehow that would be something motive for Alex to kill his sister. Well, you hear Alex later in the interview when they start questioning Alex's sexuality. Alex said, I'm not, I'm straight, but if I wasn't, my parents would be open to that. He says that right in there. It's not a motive. His grades dropping during COVID, that's a reason to kill your whole family? Or he didn't have a job? How many kids didn't? How many kids had their grades drop during COVID? And Alex said that his father was treating him fairly, that his father was letting him make his own mistakes. When I started off talking to you about reasonable doubt in this case, I gave you the Tylenol example. And the purpose of that is to say that even though a doubt can be small, it can be reasonable. And the only thing that you have to believe in this case to make that reasonable is that somebody could commit a home invasion and have some working knowledge of a firearm. And if that's impossible, that's your decision, I guess, because you are the judges of the facts of this case. That's why we stand up when you come in, and we stand up when you go out, because nobody can tell you what reasonable doubt means to you. That's why we have 12 of you. You're all going to have different attitudes or opinions. But when you look at a case that involves circumstantial evidence, if all you got to believe is that somebody broke into this house and used the firearm that was sitting right there, and they knew how to operate it, that's not such a stretch. That's not so hard to believe. Maybe it will be for some of you, and that would be your right to feel that way. But would you be would you take that Tylenol? If that's all it took? Are you taking the Tylenol out of that state's case in this case? Because if you're not, that's reasonable doubt. We believe that reasonable doubt is all over this case. Alex had no reason to want to harm his family. And we would ask that you return a verdict of not guilty.